Well, welcome everyone. It's been a while since I seen so many faces in the lecture room here. My name is Nina Dieters. I work as a program maker for Studium Generale. And after such a long time seeing no audience, I was wondering, for who is this the first time Studium Generale? Are any first timers here? Oh, welcome. Good to see you. Well, that's also a good reason for me to say a bit about Studium Generale, maybe, introduce us a bit. We organize events like this, conventional lectures, but also science cafes, every now and then a debate or an excursion, could be anything. But what all these events have in common is that we want to bring what happens inside the university to a broader audience. And yeah, you could also say for students especially, it can be a nice way to learn more about fields of research outside the one you are focused on yourself. Now, let's cut the promo talk. Sorry, Martin. No. And move to the speaker of today. For October, we set up a lecture series about animals and us, humans. This idea inevitably came from the COVID-19 pandemic that started with the so-called zoonose, a virus that can be transmitted from other animals to humans. And this really draw attention to the way we interact with animals, with our surroundings. And in this series, we wanted to explore the questions: how do we see animals, and are we able to see them for what they are? We've unfortunately had to cancel the first lecture. That would have been last week, but I'm trying to find a new date for that. So if you bought a ticket for that, I'm working on it. And today, Maarten Reesink will discuss the way animals are portrayed in the media and how these images influence that way that we see animals. Maarten Reesink is a researcher and lecturer in animal studies at the Department of Media Studies and Institute of Interdisciplinary Studies at the University of Amsterdam. And where one might think that studying animals is the area of biologists, there is an increasing interest for studying animals in the humanities as well. Maarten is actually a pioneer in the Netherlands in this field of animal studies. Recently he set up the Center for Animal Studies. That is an interdisciplinary knowledge platform for researchers and students. And in March of this year, he published his book, Dier en Mens, de band tussen ons en andere dieren, in Dutch or in English. I haven't seen the English title, but I'll freely translate it to animals and humans and the relationships between us and other animals. A book that gives you a really good idea of what animal studies is about. Now, the setup for tonight, Maarten will give a lecture of about an hour, and after that we will have plenty of time for questions or discussion. The floor is yours, Maarten.
Thank you. Okay, so my talk today will be actually about the crossroads of my two original disciplines. As was already said in the introduction, originally I am a media scholar, and in the last 15 years I've specialized in animal studies. So what we're going to talk about today, images of animals, is actually about the crossroads of these. Is not well, I will focus on audiovisual media images of animals. That's the idea of images of animals, so audiovisual media. Of course, we're living now in a media culture, in a media society. And probably when it comes to animals, they are even more important for reasons I will discuss in a minute. But what I want to do in this lecture is I want to relate the audiovisual images that we see in film, on television, on blackboards, everywhere around us. I will connect that to the images of animals in our heads, in our minds. So how do the images we produce and we consume as television viewers or film visitors, how do they connect to how we think about animals? That's the idea for today, which means that I will first shortly, although you already did quite well, give you a short introduction about what animal studies is. Then I will ask the question, why look at animals in the first place? And then I will give you a sort of a historical overview of the audiovisual images of animals that we see, especially in Western culture, in audiovisual culture. And my focus will be on how the images that we produce and that we see in audiovisual media, how they relate to developments in society in a much broader sense, how that relates to the way our thinking of animals has changed. And of course, it's a two-way relation here. So images of animals do have influence on society, just as society has influence on the images that are produced, the images of animals that are produced by society or by some media professionals in society. So I will go through 3 periods of images of animals, and then we'll end with a 4th one that I have named for the moment Animals Looking Back. And what I mean by that you will find out in about an hour. What I'm not going to discuss in this hour is the popularity of animals on the web. On the website of Studium Generale, there's already a link to my favorite cat video, which is Henry II Port de Deux. So make a note of that if you want to see a really original cat video. And actually, the question that I'm posed most of all, by far most of all, by journalists calling me at the university is this question: why do cats dominate the internet? So that's what I'm not going to talk about today, apart from the fact that you can always ask me in the Q&A afterwards, but that's not part of the lecture. Okay, as I said, let's start with animal studies. And the first thing you have to understand is that that animal studies is not biology or zoology. Although zoology is one could say is part of animal studies actually is most of the people working in the field of animal studies actually are people working in the traditional disciplines of the humanities and the social sciences. So what you probably generally would think of as human sciences. But this is what actually happened over the last 2, 3, maybe even 4 decades, is that starting in the United States and in England, so in the Anglo-Saxon countries, actually people working in the humanities and the social sciences have discovered the animal, so to speak. So it was a blind spot in, for example, in history, because of course, and that is what some historians started to wonder about. Somewhere in the 1980s, our human history would have been totally different were there not animals in our society. And it really mattered that some animals at the beginning of what we now think of as our Western culture were there in the Fertile Crescent at the eastern part of the Mediterranean. And if they wouldn't have been there, like the cow, like the goat, like the sheep, like the horse, if they wouldn't have been there, but they would have lived in the New World, the Americas, probably the Indians or the Native Americans would have discovered us instead of us discovering them. So actually, animals have, from the very beginning, have influenced the development of our culture, as historians suddenly discovered somewhere in the 1980s. And then philosophers started to ask themselves, but why is it that we always pose the question, what makes us human? That's what at least Western philosophy has always, in Western philosophy always has been the dominant question. What makes us human? Why not, at least since the beginning of, since the publication of The Origin of Species by Darwin, why not ask ourselves the question, what makes us animal? Because, of course, we are animals. And an art historian said, well, yeah, there are animals everywhere in our buildings, in our statues, well, everywhere. And then sociologists started to say, well, animals are still in our societies today. And for some people, they are the most important persons in their life, even sometimes more important than companion humans. And then, of course, people working in law started to say, well, if animals are so similar to us, well, other animals are so similar to us, then they probably should have rights as well in one way or another. We should think about their welfare. So what happened was that in the humanities and in the social sciences, people started to discover what was until then the blind spot in their disciplines, which were, to a certain extent, were defined as human sciences, and they discovered the animal in all these kinds of, in all these traditional disciplines, and that is actually what animal studies is. So animal studies is about the relations between humans and animals in all sorts of ways. That is us eating animals, that is us living together with our companion animals, that is us going to zoos to see wild animals, or going in the wild, in wild nature to see wild animals, if they are still there. That is about all sorts of relations that we, of course, have with animals. And one of these relations, of course, is us looking at animals in our culture, especially in our audiovisual culture. And that's not an unimportant point at all. As John Berger claims, he died some years ago, and you might know, Berger he was a scientist, a scholar, a writer, an artist, and he was also a famous Briton. He was the host of a television series, Ways of Seeing. And Berger was, among so many other things, he was specialized in visual culture, which is a discipline that we don't know at Dutch universities, but which is a very traditional discipline at Anglo-Saxon universities, and which is about, well, all sorts of things that one can look at, from statues to buildings to paintings to, well, whatever you can, everything that is around us. And actually, Berger is one of the founding fathers of animal studies by publishing this small essay in 1979, Why Look at Animals? And in this essay, Berger actually really was the first scholar who actually posed this question in a very fundamental way. By which I mean that he really asked questions, asked the fundamental question, what makes animals so interesting for us? What makes a living animal different than a statue of an animal or a painting of an animal? Of course, it's living, and it's looking back at us, and we don't know what it thinks. So he really asked very fundamental questions about us and our relation to other animals, and by that, although he didn't mean to be or to become the founding father of a new discipline, actually he did become so by just a small essay, and it is published in Dutch only recently, and has this beautiful cover, Waarom naar dieren kijken. So that's why I put it on the slide. And the reason why he is so fundamental for this story that I'm going to tell you is that he says, well, actually the question that I pose, why look at animals, is an interesting question, but I'm just a little bit too late, because actually there are no real animals around us anymore. We are living by ourselves. Once, we as hunter-gatherers, we lived amongst animals. But actually, and he claims that the defining moment in human history is actually the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, starting in the 18th century in Great Britain. He says, well, that's where the industrialization of the Western world starts, and that's where the separation between us living as farmers, at least a large part of our population, still living a pastoral life, not in cities, but as farmers or amongst farmers. That's where the separation started. And most of us, the urbanization started. And from then on, we lived further and further away from animals. So that means we don't live with animals anymore. Well, apart, of course, from our pets, our companion animals. But according to Berger, these are not real animals. These are really humanized animals. We've created the dogs and cats that really are no tigers or wolves anymore. On the contrary, is his opinion. But that doesn't mean that we don't see animals in society in general anymore. The other part of his thesis is that actually animals have become a favorite object of what we, in a bit of a scientific lingo, is the symbolic and or artificial and or audiovisual images. That's how most of us in general see animals. That's where and how we see most of the animals today. In cultural objects, in cultural artifacts, in audiovisual artifacts, as we're living in audiovisual cultures. Mind you, Berger wrote this in 1979, and we're now living so many decades later. And of course, he's right, and he's more right. He has his argument has become even more convincing over time. As for example, I just took some pictures I took from the web, and if you for example, now look at the news broadcasting today. There are always animals in one way or another in the news. And some animals become famous, which is not only to the benefit. Often you probably recognize Bokito, and you probably recognize Knut. And then there are other animals, the wolves, of course, in the Netherlands, and the images of slaughterhouses that are constantly in the news again and again. So animals are part of the news, are becoming part of the news in all sorts of ways. And if we look at the audiovisual images in the theater and on the television screen, we also see lots of animals. Actually, Finding Nemo to this day has been is the most sold DVD ever in the world. Finding Nemo. And March of the Penguins, if it comes to documentaries, March of the Penguins is to this day one of the most profitable documentary ever. So not only in terms of nature documentaries, in documentaries, period. March of the Penguins, which is a documentary about some waggling birds somewhere in the south over there. So the point Berger made, animals really are enormously popular. It's not that we don't like animals or we don't want to see them. On the contrary, we don't live with animals anymore, but we love them. We seem to love them even more over time. Okay. That's interesting. And that's interesting for another reason. Wait a minute. That's interesting for another reason. And that is that if Berger is right and we don't live with animals anymore, that is real animals in our direct environment, then of course the influence of audiovisual media, the images of animals in audiovisual media, become even more important because we don't have any direct experiences with animals ourselves anymore. So we really should think look at audiovisual images of animals in a very analytical and very critical way. What kind of imagery of animals are we producing? What kind of imagery are we showing on television? What kind of stories on animals are we telling each other? Because as one of my favorite scholars in animal studies, Erica Fudge, in this little booklet that I very much recommend as a first book in animal studies, if you are interested in it, as Erica Fudge claims in this book, in this booklet, Animal, images and words do matter. It's in two ways. One way is that, of course, the audiovisual products, the audiovisual images that we produce, on the one hand, are a reflection of society and are a reflection of how we think about animals, for example, how we look at animals and how we think about animals. But on the other hand, they also produce how we look. So they influence how we think about animals. So it's not just a reflection, it's also a production of how we think, a construction. It constructs how we think about animals. And that applies to images as well as to words. I'm going to talk about images, of course, but think about the word. Think about how we use the words animal on the one hand and human on the other hand. Although we know that we are animals ourselves, we use the words as a contradiction. There is a contradiction between, on the one hand, for example, humans who are really beasts, which means they are terrible, they are horrible people, and they are not humane at all. So there is beastly on the one hand, negative, and humane on the other hand, which is positive. So we see that as a contradiction. The connotations between animal on the one hand and human on the other hand, we see that as a contradiction. So actually, the fact that Erica Fudge called her book Animal is ironic and is critical in the sense that she says, well, actually the word animal itself, or not the word itself, but the way we use this word and this sort of words and the connotations with which we use it in common language, that's what's wrong with it. That's where it starts. That's where it starts. So words and images do matter. And they do matter even more when we are not living in close company with animals, as most of us living in cities do today. Giving you some examples, of course, this is the ultimate negative example, Jaws. A totally unrealistic, a beautiful film by aesthetic standards, maybe, but a completely unrealistic film, and a film that obviously has had enormous negative consequences for the image or the way we look at sharks. So this is obviously images do matter. And another point that I immediately want to stress is that you see that we cast animals in films, be they documentaries or fiction films, we cast animals in specific roles. Either they are the bad guys, the ultimate bad guys, Jaws, but also there are other images of animals as well. Wait a minute, I'm going back. There are other images of animals as well. This you also immediately recognize. Even this kind of imagery of little cute cats, little cute dogs, little cute bears that miss you, that of course animals don't miss you. Of course bears don't miss anyone. They don't even miss other bears because they're sultry animals in general. And they certainly don't miss humans, and they certainly miss the one that you send this postcard to. So these are the two These are the two stereotypes that we use for animals, even more so by some stereotyped groups of people. They are the ultimate bad guys, or they are the ultimate good guys. Now you might say, what's wrong with being a good guy? I'll come to that in a minute. And then, of course, there are images that are really very strange if you think about it for even 1 second. How could a pig be jolly about? Well, I don't even have to explain that. But then again, probably you don't even think too much about it because it has become such a stereotype. You see that at all kinds of butchery stores. And of course, that's how stereotypes work. You don't even think about them if you see them often enough. Which brings me to the question, when did we start making images of animals? Because, of course, I will return to today in a minute, but where did it all start? When did we start producing animal imagery? Well, it started from the very beginning onwards. When we started to make images, we started to picture animals from the very beginning. The first images that we produced were, of course, our cave paintings, and these were images of animals. Animals fascinated us from the very first moment onwards into, and I skipped some steps in our cultural evolution, until the beginning of the 20th century, when this new mass medium of film started. The first filmic images, you might know them, are these ones, produced by Edward Muybridge, an English, actually he was a photographer. And the question that was posed to him was if he could give an answer to the question if there was one moment when a horse was galloping, if there was one moment in which all four of his legs were off the ground. Now, for us, that's quite obvious, but for them there was quite some discussion about this. If there was one moment when all the feet of the horse were off the ground, and what he produced was actually, as I said, he was a photographer, and he produced a combination of cameras in which that he made to click just milliseconds after each other, so that he could produce a film strip, as you see here on the screen, and that actually evolved into what we now know as film. So this wasn't, one could say, this wasn't even the first film, as it wasn't a film, but this is where it started with animals. So from the very first moments of our history, from our prehistory as hunter-gatherers, until the 20th century with our mass media, we always started with animals. Animals fascinated us from the very fascinated us from the very first moment. And then, of course, they became very popular in the theaters that emerged in the first decades of the 20th century. That is the rise of this new medium of moving imagery, of film. And one of the genres that was very popular in the first 2 to 3 decades of the 20th century was the hunting film. Now, I'm not going to show you any of these hunting images, if only because they're not very nice images to look at. But I think you can imagine seeing from this stills what they look like. Obviously, they were. Most of these films were actually shot in Africa, which was by then, of course, a very well. It was a white spot on the map, so to speak. And what you saw in most of these films were white heroes, going to this unfamiliar territory, this unfamiliar continent, and being the heroes by shooting these enormously dangerous large animals. Obviously from a very large distance, so the films are in general, the films you see of course, obviously it's in black and white, and you don't see that much, but you see that there are white male hunters assisted by, of course, black African helpers who are playing the hero in the African wilderness by shooting elephants and elephants, lions, and all these kinds of megafauna. And so this was one of the most popular genres in the beginning, in the first decades of the film as a new medium. And actually, and this is what I want to show you, actually some decades later, almost half a century later, and that means we're halfway the 20th century, not that much has changed if we see a totally new host of this new television series, David Attenborough, for his first program, the first program in which he appeared as a host on television, and that was Zoo Quest. And I'm going to show you a small clip of that series, if only to show you, and I hope that it works.
For several months, I am naturally adopting my...
For all its obvious flaws, Keaton's films captured my childish row as to whether or not I could be allowed.
For Zoo Quest, David Attenborough went into the wild and see what happens. And of course he doesn't shoot animals anymore. That is, he shoots them by film, but he also captures them for the London Zoo.
My first natural history series, Zoo Quest, recorded the progress of animal collecting expeditions arranged for the London Zoo and brought to the screen places and animals that had never before been seen on television or in the cinema, come to that. One targeted the largest lizard in the world, which lived on the small Indonesian island of Komodo. Few people had heard of it, and in Indonesia no one seemed very sure where the island was. Eventually, we set off with a fisherman who said that he did, but after a couple of days at sea, I had my doubts.
I said to the captain, "You haven't been to Komodo before, haven't you?" And he said, "Balloon." And I didn't know what balloon meant, so I had to go down into the code and find my Indonesian dictionary. I looked up balloon and it said, "Not yet." So it was clear he didn't know the way.
After a week at sea, and having survived encounters with coral reefs and whirlpools, we arrived at what I thought must be Komodo.
And I remember wading ashore across the coral lagoon and finding a tiny little village and saying, "Excuse me, look, is this Komodo?" And they, yeah, it's Komodo. That was okay.
The locals recommended that we should use a dead goat as bait. Once in the bush, we began to build a trap using materials gathered from nearby, as I recorded in my journal.
This was the dragon trap with a little bait in there. And when the dragon, if he went in the front end, trod on there, that pulled it down, which then pulled the ring down, which released that rod, which then pulled down because there was a lump of rock on the bottom, so clunk, down it would go.
And now... There was a rustle in the bush, and there was the dragon. Our first sight of this magnificent monster.
To my surprise, we were looking out at the trap, and I heard a noise behind me. I turned around, and there was a dragon that was taken at that particular moment, looking at me straight in the eye from only about a couple of yards away. And I looked at it, and it looked at me, and I thought, well, at least I might take a photograph. So that was the photograph I took of him. And then, eventually, he rather wearily heaved himself up and strolled round us and went down into the dry riverbed where we'd made the trap.
And down came the dog, Hastily, we piled boulders on the door so that he couldn't lift it up. We've got him.
Those early films seem pretty ordinary these days, but they were nonetheless popular because...
So, as I said, it's interesting to see that, although I have to say that David Attenborough himself is also quite self-critical about these first films he made, if only because of the fact that actually, as the title of the series correctly mentioned, it was a quest that he did for the zoo, for the London Zoo actually, and the animals that he spotted in the wild were actually captured to take them back to Europe to enclose them in the London Zoo. So it was actually also commercial for the London Zoo, and he was sort of a hunter, although he didn't kill the animals, of course. He was a sort of hunter, the white man coming to the wilderness there with some of black helpers. You see even in the film by David Attenborough. So it's not that dissimilar of the whole way that we looked at nature from the hunting films half a century earlier. Then again, you see a shift here. You see a shift here because, as I said, there was a first period in which there was a division between human culture on the one hand and animals' nature on the other hand. And to give you even one extra clue, in this first period, animals were objects. They were the objects of our gaze. So where they were not active in one way or another, they were our victims or our, the objects of our interest. Now in the second period you see a small shift, and the shift is actually, one could argue, from David Attenborough at the left side, of course, to does anyone recognize the person on the right side of this slide? No one? No, really? Oh, this is Desmond Morris, the one you know of the bestseller The Naked Ape. Desmond Morris was the mammals curator at the London Zoo. Also by then a famous Briton, if only because he was the host of this television series Zoo Time, which started its broadcasting in 1956, so some years later, some years after Zoo Quest. And actually, Desmond Morris was the person who brought for example, the chimpanzees that were taken from the wild then, probably not by David Attenborough, but anyway, taken from the wild. And he brought them not only to the London Zoo, but also to the television studio. So we learned about them in a much more, in a not that much objectified way as in previous periods. So you see that animals are seen and are discussed and are presented on the television screen by now in a more humanized way. They are sort of small, childlike humans, cute little animals. So there's a shift here. They're not really human, but there are cute little baby-like furry fellows. And actually, there was one company that, from the very beginning onwards, from the shift from film to television, actually even before the shift to television, already in the era of film, who already presented animals as cute individuals, and that's of course Disney. Disney started in the 1940s to produce audiovisual imagery in which, and this was quite revolutionary, in which animals actually were the protagonists. So the main character, actually they were individual characters, sometimes of course composed by some individuals, and they were presented in one story, and they were presented as if it was about one individual animal. But then again, they presented the animals as individuals and as the main individuals also in the documentaries that they produced for the theaters and later for television, Seal Island, True life adventures was what Disney called this series. And as I said, it was really revolutionary to actually place animals in the spotlights as individuals with which the viewer could actually identify. Now maybe you now wonder, did Disney become really big with documentaries? Didn't Disney become already quite successful with yes, of course, with animation films. Actually, Disney started out with animation films. Of course, King Kong wasn't a Disney product. Bambi was. And of course, Bambi was only, although it was one of the main successes of Disney in the first half of the 20th century, it was certainly not their first animation film in which actually animals played a main role. Here again you see, that's the point I wanted to make with this slide, that you see animals in animation or in fictional films cast as either the very bad guy or the very cute, so the very good guy. But they are animals, and actually, of course, this was, as I said, this was not the beginning of Disney. Actually, the first sound movie, so not only with moving images, but also with sound, was this film, Steamboat Willie, 1928. But there's a difference here, you see. There's a difference with, for example, Bambi, so some of the later films, and there certainly is a difference with some of the documentaries that he started to produce, Walt Disney, started to produce in the 1940s and 1950s. The difference being that, of course, Mickey Mouse is not a mouse at all. Bambi was actually a real deer, whose mother, of course, was shot by a human, not a humane, a human hunter. But Mickey Mouse was not a mouse at all. Actually, Mickey Mouse was just a human rascal with human clothes and with a human ship. There are no mouse ships. He actually had, oh, you don't see that on the picture here. He actually had cattle. He also had a dog that he played with in a quite animal-friendly way. But that says it all. Mickey Mouse was actually a real humanized creature that only supposedly was a mouse, but didn't actually live any mouse life at all. I make a point of it because I will come back to this in a minute. Of course, this is where Disney started with. So okay, animals as protagonists, as the main characters in the films, but in a quite humanized way. And I'll give you an example of that, which actually is a parody, a recent parody on The Lion King. And no, I'm not going to say anything about it before. Let's just. And of course, there is some commercial before, and that gives me the time to say that this film is called "If Disney Cartoon Animals Were Scientifically Accurate."
Seamless, shiny, of sex.
Was accurate.
I'm king now. You know what that means, don't you?
That I'm your queen and we'll rule together?
That I'll be mating with every lioness here, most of whom you're related to, so let's just not make this weird.
Simba, aren't you my boyfriend now?
All right, fine, I'll be your boyfriend. God, but I'm also everyone's king.
So what?
Which means I need to put it to them whenever they're in heat, including your mom, up to 100 times a day so that the pride lasts for generations.
Ugh, my mom's like 13.
Yeah, lions can give birth till they're 15, so...
You're acting so cold. I love you!
I love you too, but It's a numbers game on this savannah, so I have to have a lot of sex with a lot of lions.
I'm gonna be sick.
Oh, come on. You're not the one that has to have sex with their own mother.
So let's run away and live happily ever after.
And leave the pride unprotected?
So love is meaningless.
Hey, let's have sex.
I would really like that.
I would really like that too. Let's go. I last 21 seconds, which works out great for me because they're all waiting. Sex! I should let you know. My penis is spiked.
I'm aware. I fornicated with Scar since I was 2.5.
Only that old?
Yeah, and I've had 10 cubs die already. But hey, Hakuna Matata, right?
Yeah. Otherwise, I'd have to kill your cubs to force you into heat.
Because you're my boo?
Yeah, I am. Yours and everyone else's.
Okay, so and now this is quite an innocent example of how Disney obviously in the story of Lion King tells you actually a rather middle class American story about the nuclear family as a central focus of the story, to which of course lions in the wild generally don't really apply. So, but this is a quite innocent example of how we look at animals in a maybe a bit too humanoid way. But it also, this humanization of or anthropomorphization to use a scientific term, this anthropomorphization of animals actually also has its very negative consequences, and that's what another founding father of animal studies, Steve Baker, is writing about in his really seminal book, Picturing the Beast. And what he's talking about is the Destinification of the animal. And by that he means that we look at animals in a specific way, of which not only Disney is the only course, maybe not even the main, or the main, the main origin. This is the way we in Western societies look at animals, and Disney is only strengthening this tendency of us today looking at animals in a specific way, and that perspective on animals that we in general have is characterized by well, at least three elements. Baker argues. That is, first of all, marginalization in quite some, although at the beginning I said there are quite some animals in the news as well as in films, etc., etc. In general, when it comes to representations of our society, take for example in movies, take for example in soap operas, you don't see any animal in the soap opera. While it's almost incredible that there are no animals in the streets or in families or in nowhere anywhere in human series, in series about humans. So animals are marginalized in most audiovisual genres. They are stereotyped, as I already explained, in good versus bad, and they are trivialized. They are funny. They are a bit weird, they are funny, they are a bit stupid, they are to laugh at. That's the whole point. And actually, when you see animals, in quite some cases, they are funny. So at first you might think, well, this is positive. Animals are cute, are funny, what's the problem? Well, the problem is they are just that. They are funny, they are cute. They are not to be taken seriously. Take, for example, the bear that I showed earlier, the bear on the postcard. It works, says Baker, and I agree with him. It works because the bear is not a bear at all. It works to the extent that the bear is de-bearified, so to speak. So it works because actually the images we produce of animals don't make sense of, but make nonsense of the animals. So the more the animals are trivialized, the less they refer to the original animal, the better they work for the message that we want to bring. We miss you, darling. So that's why this trivialization of animals is really so pernicious in Steve Baker's view. And again, as I said, Disney is just one of the producers who does it, but actually Disney is not the original course. Disney is just one of the producers of this kind of imagery. We see that all the time, and we see it everywhere. We see it in commercials. We see it in all sorts of displays. We see it, for example, if you go to a supermarket, you see all sorts of sweets, varkentjes, apenkoppen, ape faces. We eat funny ape faces. Of course, the Party for the Animals, that cannot be serious. I mean, it's about animals. Animals in general are not taken seriously. That's our main mentality. That's what he calls our Disney mentality. So it's not just about Disney at all. He would hope that Disney was the only problem. It's not about Disney at all. It's much broader. But Disney is probably the most well-known and the commercially most successful exponent of this mentality. And we all know the very serious consequences of that. Take, for example, in the 1960s, the popularity of the Dalmatians when this film was produced by Disney. Take, for example, the slow lorries. That probably you all know this example of on YouTube. We think, oh, how cute! Oh, he probably likes us. Oh. And the dog by Paris Hilton's dog that is humanized in all sorts of ways. So it has very serious consequences. The way that we think we love animals and that we think they are cute and funny, but we don't take them. We humanize them too much, and we don't take them serious as the creatures that they really are. That's the whole point that Steve Baker is trying to make. Now you see there is a development as well from this, what I called the second period of looking at animals as humanoid, as sort of humanoid children, and that is that one could say that started out with biologists, with ethologists, looking at animals in different ways, discovering things about animals that we didn't know before. Probably you all know the woman at the left side of this slide, Jane Goodall, who looked at, who not only discovered that animals made tools, which was really revolutionary at the time, and that all animals have culture, which really was revolutionary at the time, but also that she looked at wild animals as individuals. And of course, the person at the right side of this slide, Frans Waal, is, as so many ethologists and zoologists at the moment, are working in line with what actually Jane Goodall and some others in the 1960s already, the line they already started of looking at animals in different ways. That is animals as subjects. So we're half a century later now, and we're really starting to look at animals in really different ways, from animals as objects to animals as subjects. How does that look like? Well, this is, well, to a certain extent one could say that there are some Dutch documentary makers who were a bit ahead of their time. One of them, Bert Haanstra, who actually already in 1961 made a film when even Jane Goodall hadn't published her first papers about the chimpanzees in Gombe. He started to look at not only at animals in Artis, in the zoo in Amsterdam, but also at the humans, and try to find the similarities between the animals on one side of the bars and the humans on the other side of the bars. So humans as subjects, we begin to see animals in different ways, and that also, you also see this development some decades later in film. Now you have to realize that in the 1960s and the 1970s, wildlife films weren't that popular as they are today. Actually, actually one of the first films that started this revival of wildlife documentaries, not only on television, but also in the theaters that we still see today. Wildlife documentaries are enormously popular. That hasn't always been this way. I mean, as I already said, Disney started in the 1940s and 1950s. Then there was a decline in wildlife films. And actually one of the most important films that actually evolved into the revival of wildlife documentaries was a film that was not about great apes, that was not about elephants, that wasn't even about cats or dogs. No, it was a film about, believe it or not, it was a film about insects. And maybe some of you have seen it. I'm going to show you the trailer of the film.
Plonger 24 heures dans un monde inconnu pour une aventure à l'échelle du centimètre. Dans cet univers, le sablier du temps lui-même s'accélère. 1 heure pour un jour pour une saison pour une vie. Un film magique, avec tous les acteurs du microcosmos.
So a film about insects that was actually in the Anglo-Saxon world. The film got the title "The Grass People," which could be said to be an anthropomorphization of the insects. But the film itself, and also the voice-over, actually doesn't anthropomorphize the animals at all. So it is really the fact that you follow the lives of these small animals and follow them in. Yes?
David Attenborough was also someone who put animals in a subject position, or not?
Well, not. That's only in the fourth period that I'm going to discuss in a minute. So he started doing that in the, let's say, in the last decade. But this is where the revival of the wildlife documentaries, well, one of the films, but probably this is a very important one because filmmakers actually realized, well, if you can make a buck by making a documentary about insects, you can really make a profit by any animal at all. So actually, this is also as the producers of The March of the Penguins later claimed. This is also where they started to think about the film about the penguins. As I said, if insects can do it, any animal can do it. So this is where you see that we see animals, even insects, as individuals with their own lives that are intriguing, that are interesting to follow. And actually, in the decades afterwards, we're now, of course, at the end of the 20th century. You probably saw all of these series, what we call blue chip documentary series, mainly, or these all made by the Natural History Department by the BBC. Of all places on Earth, all kinds of wild animals, not so much individual animals, because until recently, actually, if you, for example, if you watch these series and you hear the voiceovers, then you see that Attenborough is constantly referring to species, not to individuals. So there's really, until quite recently, there is really a difference between the approach Attenborough or the BBC is taking and the approach Disney is taking. But also Disney in its way and Attenborough or the BBC in another way also were enormously successful in producing this kind of wildlife series. So viewers weren't missing at all, but something is missing in all these series, almost missing in all these series. What is missing in these series? People. And that's telling, because of course in the hunting films people were actually the protagonists, the actors, the main characters, and the animals were the objects. Now what you see here is that of course animals are the protagonists, but mostly at the level of species, and the humans are completely out of sight, really out of sight. And that's intriguing, certainly for those of you who have once in a lifetime gone, for example, to a safari, on a safari in Africa. It's very difficult to take a picture without seeing any reference to other humans, not only your fellow travelers, but also any trace of human activity at all. That's quite difficult. Now they succeed, but that's quite an effort. And they did it on purpose. This is how we want to look at nature, or how we wanted to look at nature in the last few decades, maybe until the final phase that I'll come to in a minute. This is how we wanted to look at nature. It should be pristine, it should be innocent, it should be wild, it should be green, but without humans at all. And that's where, I know I'm going a bit over time, but I'm coming to my final period, which is the fourth period, in which you see, and I think this is a positive development, in which you see that the human is coming back into the picture, in a literal way. And that means that the representation of animals also becomes a bit different. They become, as I put it, they become fellow citizens in our world in all sorts of ways. These are some early examples that probably most of you know. The bear, Lourdes, it's actually also a French film, just as Microcosmos was also produced by some French filmmakers. And the story of the Weeping Camel and Grizzly Man, very different films, and I'm not going to dive into the details of these films, but they are all about the relation between us and other animals in very different contexts. And these are early examples, but probably most of you will at least recognize some more recent examples. Of course, in the Netherlands, the Wilde Stad, about Amsterdam, seen, at least that's how it is introduced, seen by Abatutu, the cat, but it is, and that's what really intrigues me, and what I think is very positive about this film, that it actually produces a picture of Amsterdam as a multi-species society, in which there are not only humans, but also rats and birds, gulls and ducks, and so it's a really multi-species society, which of course it is, but some people don't want to see it that way. although Apatutu will. And of course, Katie, I think some of you probably have seen that film as well, in which Istanbul is also, in a bit different way, but is presented as a multi-species society, at least in terms of the fact that there are two species dominant in the city, humans on the one hand and cats on the other hand. But that doesn't only apply to documentaries, and maybe documentaries is only one of the real important genres in terms of representing this shift in attention. Another genre is animation. And one could say, well, animation is only a children's genre. It's not for grown-ups. But then again, that makes it probably even more important. And what do we give our children? What kind of imagery of animals do we give our children? Well, on the one hand, Babe, of course, a bit older film, 1995. But it's a really different image of pigs than we see in front of our butchery stores. Actually, if you remember, and if you don't remember, do see the film once again. Actually, the first quarter of an hour of the film is quite critical about factory farming, although in a simplistic way. But the way the duck explains to Pig what is actually going on the farm is sometimes quite explicit. And then Ratatouille. Now, on a superficial level, one might say, well, Ratatouille is aesthetically is a perfect film. It's sort of a Mickey Mouse 2.0. Of course, technology has evolved, and so it looks much better. But then again, think about think about the story that the film tells. Actually, it is about a rat. And think about this, the rat remains a rat, so it's not about a humanized figure like Mickey Mouse. No, this is a real rat who actually lives as a rat. And actually, it is so successful together with, what's the human person again? Is Remy the rat, or is it No, Remy is the rat. Actually, he runs together with a human. He runs this extremely successful restaurant. Why? Because the rat smells so well, much better than a human. So the rat remains a rat, and being a rat is a protagonist of the film. And being a rat, he has to explain. He has to go down to the outskirts of Paris to explain to his fellow rats, to his own family, why he works together with these horrible humans. And the message of the film is that actually we live together, we humans and animals live together in Paris and have to do with each other. So it's a completely different, actually it's a completely different story. It tells you a different story about the relations between humans and animals. Actually, in this film, humans and animals have relations with each other, humans remaining humans, animals remaining animals. While the film itself is not that ecological at all. It doesn't seem to be ecological or animal-friendly values. And there are quite some films, and I'll just give you some examples, that are much more explicit in their ecological and animal-friendly messages. So for those of you who think that actually the animation films that we see today and we show to our children today in this genre of animation are just a sophisticated form of Mickey Mouse, no, the stories are in general are really different. There's really a new way of representing animals, humans, and the relations between animals and humans. Some final examples, because I'm at the end of my story. This is an example, Bear 71. Check that one out. You cannot have seen it in the theaters because it's an online documentary, which means that it is non-linear. You have to follow the bear bear living in the wilderness to a certain extent in Canada, and you have to follow the bear online yourself in various ways that you have to choose, clicking with your mouse. So these are new ways of representing our relation with wild animals in this case. And of course there are also new ways. Think about the webcams of, in Dutch, the bird protection, vogelbescherming. All kinds of webcams by which we can follow animals in the wild. But you see that zoos are also using this new CCTV technology to give us a view, actually in quite some cases a live view, in which you can actually follow the animal living his or her life. And the fact that you can follow the animal, the individual animal, follow the animal during all kinds of intensive periods in its lives, gives you a completely different, literally a different view and a different image in your mind of the animal itself. I'll give you one final example. Well, I have 3 examples, and I think I have to choose one for the well, what is intriguing in terms of technology? Probably you know the other films, and I hope my slides will be put online for those of you who want the slides, because there are quite some links to films that I couldn't show in this small hour. But as by way of the end of my presentation, I'll show you one clip of a group of langurs, which are a group of monkeys. And this is a clip from an episode of Spy in the Wild, in which you see that all kinds of mini cameras are built in the eyes of furry animals that are actually put in the wild. So the animals in the wild think that this is maybe another one of the family, while it is a stuffed animal with a camera in its eye. And sometimes that means that we see behavior in animals that we even didn't know existed, and that poses all sorts of questions about animals. So what intrigues me here is a combination of human technology interacting with active animals. This also went viral.
In Rajasthan, the temple langurs have taken Spy Monkey into the heart of the family. But some are keen to take the budding relationship to the next level and are getting a little too familiar. One seems to want to babysit her. But disaster strikes. An injured baby is a cause for concern. And this langur seems to believe she's died. Then, something extraordinary happens. The monkeys gather round the motionless spy creature as if it is a real baby. Just as they do when their own babies die. A calm and contemplative mood descends on the colony. There's a sense of grief, as well as empathy for one another. Quite accidentally, our spy creature is at the centre of something extraordinary, capturing emotions that have rarely been observed.
So what you see here is the result of a miniaturization of audiovisual media. Very small cameras, still producing magnificent images, and robotization, and how you can make robots do all sorts of work, and how that forms new interactions with humans. And actually, what I'm of course hoping for, and I'm sometimes talking about this with my other lecturers on digital media. Actually, what I'm hoping for, that in my lifetime, they will be able to develop an app with which I can really talk with my cats, because I think that's actually what we all want, don't we? Thank you.
Thank you, Maarten. We have some time left for questions, but I first was thinking, well, I consider myself messed up. First movie I got was Bambi on VCR, Looney Tunes, I loved it. I thought, wouldn't it be better to, let's say, my hypothetical niece of 3 years old, just to show her Barbapapa instead of Shaun the Sheep, for instance. Just, yeah, show them fictional creatures instead of these cute animals like Shaun the Sheep. Or would you argue to remove animals from kids' series?
No, not at all. Well, sometimes, at the end of one of my lectures that I gave also on this topic, one person in the audience asked, does this mean that from this moment onward I can't watch any Disney movie with my children anymore? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I hope that Disney movies is not the only kind of movie with animals that you're showing them. I mean, this is actually how stereotypes work. They work because a specific image, a specific kind of image becomes so dominant that the audience, be it children or any kind of audience, really starts believing in it, even in an unconscious level. So what I hope for is that, first of all, that actually you watch Disney movies with all sorts of other movies about all sorts of topics, including animals. And I hope that your children or any children will grow up with companion animals, because I think that's the best way to start loving animals.
Good point. Any questions or reactions to the talk? I will throw you this microphone. There. Or I won't throw it, I'll just bring it. There you go.
Dankjewel. Thank you very... Moet ik hem richten? Yeah. Thank you very much. I think one of the questions I was wondering, and which you answered in the end, is that technology, of course, played a very big role in this, right? You could even say that at the beginning of the 20th century, maybe killing an animal was the only way to get a good shot of it with the technology that they had. I don't know too much about technology. And as cameras got better, you can do microcosmos, and in the end, you see all types of new technology. And that maybe at first to get this, make it subject, the only way is to animate it, and then it becomes easy to anthropomorphize it, as you see with Mickey Mouse. I was wondering if, for film, perhaps it's very easy to make the argument that technology was very important to facilitate certain images of animals. Were there similar developments in, for example, literature, in which, of course, these technological constraints are different or maybe less present? Do they follow these time frames of film, or do you see a more or less independent development of images?
It's a very good question on a part of animal studies that I'm not very specialized in, to be quite honest. So I have to be honest about that, and that doesn't mean that there are no intriguing developments there as well. On the contrary, there is very many, there's very much research from all kinds of literary scholars working on the representation of animals in human fiction, in language, in human language, actually. And they are more inspired, well, they are not so much dependent on technology and the development of technology as audiovisual representations are, but they are more heavily depending on, actually, on developments in biological and zoological research. So what you see is that now that we know that animals perceive, because their senses are completely different, they perceive the world around them in totally different ways. You see all sorts of developments of authors, of writers, being creative in all sorts of ways in trying to use human words, because that's the only words we have, in human words to imagine how a dog or a fly would perceive its world. So there's quite some development over there. I mean, I'm not a literary scientist, so I know that there's a whole field that I've not yet started to try to explore. But it's a good point, because this is a totally new way of representation. You see, obviously, if in audiovisual representations technology is an important source of possibilities as well as constraints, in literary representations of animals, or the way, or the worlds of animals, the lives of animals, of course, because how can you in human words describe the world of a fish or a mole, or but people are trying to do that, and it's really exciting. So there's quite some work done in this area over the past few decades, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world. But I don't know too much about that yet. That's my specialization, because I'm working at the Department for Media Studies, and Media Studies is about audiovisual media.
Hello, thank you for this interesting talk. I was wondering, why do cats rule the internet?
Good question.
Okay. Well.
Why do cats rule the internet?
The simple answer would be read my book at the at the right side of the slide. Well, these are the books that my students have to read for my introductory course on animal studies. So I already explained Animal is a very short booklet which really poses intriguing questions in a very simple way, although the book is in English. Animals and Society by Margot de Mello is an English language overview of animal studies, and my book is a Dutch overview of animal studies in general. So it's not just about audiovisual representations, but also about animal rights and about animals in zoos and about etc., the whole field. Now, I will answer your question, and no, the question of you posed. Well, actually, the point is that, well, I can answer it in one sentence, and that is that cats are perfect slapstick actors. That's the simple answer. But I'll elaborate a bit on it. And the point here is that first of all, of course, to dominate the internet, you have to be there where the films are made. So you have to be you have to live together with humans, and dogs and cats do exactly that. So that's where it starts. You have to be there. Now you can ask yourself, why are dogs, so babies, dogs and cats are favorites on the internet. Now why are cats the real most popular species on the web? And that's because cats have developed as stealth hunters, which means that a cat, well, some of you immediately recognize this, a cat hunts by hiding under or over or behind, or, well, that's what cats do. They hide and then they jump on their prey, and it has to happen within 5 or 10 seconds. That's what stealth means, that you surprise the prey and that you have to kill it within some seconds. That's why cats always hide. That's why cats have developed a very flexible spine, so that they can make all sorts of movements within those 5 seconds to kill their prey. And that's of course, that's perfect for the internet. That's perfect for us who like only films of 10 seconds. Compare that with how dogs hunt. Dogs, of course, are wolves that are domesticated. And wolves hunt by running after a prey for some hours. And then when the prey is really almost dead, they, together with some of them, they kill it. Well, that's not really nice for a 10-second video. So actually, when cats split from dogs, which was about 40 million years ago, actually cats preluded the development of internet in the 20th century, and thought, well, this is the way to dominate the digital world. And the rest is history. Well, that's how I explain it to cat favorites like myself.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
So well, actually, this is a perfect combination of culture and nature. So it's a combination of human culture and animal nature that comes together in cat videos. It's as simple as that. And if one more point, because dogs are also of course this is an intriguing question. That's why journalists always ask me. And now dog videos are also quite popular, but you have to and check the videos you will receive over the next few weeks or months. Dog videos are interesting for a very different reason than cat videos, and I'm talking in general, of course. Dog videos are interesting because in theatrical terms, they break the fourth wall. That is, while cat videos are interesting because cats don't seem to be interested in the rest of the world, they don't seem to mind. That's what's so funny. They don't even know that they are funny. They're just looking around, but not to the camera. Dogs are looking into the camera. Well, of course, they're not looking into the camera. They're looking into, let's say, the alpha of their pack, which is, of course, the human with the camera in his or her hand. So most of dog videos are interesting or funny or intriguing because the dog is reacting to the camera or is interacting with the camera. Of course, not with the camera, but with the person behind the camera. So dog videos are funny because he does something that the human asks him to do, or he does something completely different. But it's the interaction that makes dog videos funny, while it's the lack of interaction that makes cat videos funny. But of course, these are completely different carnivores. So that's the reason. Well, we all know.
Thank you for the side into animal studies. Can you clarify how we see pigs in like Babe for one hand, and see pigs in Animal Factory other hand, or eat pigs on the other hand?
So how come that we have so extremely split visions on
the dissociation,
pigs?
yeah.
Well, actually, This is well, this is really a complicated question. Actually, we have learned to do so, not only by audiovisual media, but of course also by the by the factory farming industry, by the meat industry. So to a certain extent, by some institutions, it is coincidental, and certainly by the industry, it is very much on purpose. But I think this is what we call a dominant ideology, or this is what Baker would call, this is our animal mentality. And our animal mentality when it comes to pigs is quite split, or wasn't split until quite recently, because I think a film like Pig, although it's from, what was it, 1995, it wouldn't have been possible, let's say, 2 decades before. But the way we look at animals has really changed over the last few decades, and that means that obviously in factory farming we are dealing with animals in I would say completely irresponsible and unethical ways, but that has only become a topic over the last few decades. And now we realize that what we learned about, or what we have been learned about animals, or what we have been learned about, first of all, about our own pets and about our direct relatives, say the great apes, for example, of course, to a large extent also applies to pigs who are quite intelligent, for example. So this is, well, to put it bluntly in one word, this is what is called socialization. We have learned to look at a specific way, to look at pigs in a specific way. And now that we pose questions about animals in general, about other animals, now that we know more about animals in general and the similarities to us, we start asking questions for obvious reasons about, for example, pigs. The extensive answer to your question is actually explained by Melanie Joy. And her main book, I don't know its title, but Melanie Joy, G-O-Y, it is just published some weeks ago in Dutch. So how come we started to think about pigs in that way, and how to change our way of looking at animals in general and pigs in particular, of course. Melanie Joy is the one you want to read.
I think we should stop here. Thank you very much. Okay. It's been 90 minutes.
Shit.
Although I had some questions left, but yeah. I want to thank you very much. I have in the Studium Generale tradition, I have a book for you. It's a new book by Melanie Challenger. She will be the speaker in 2 weeks. She's a philosopher, an author, and she wrote the book Het dier in ons in Dutch, or How to be an Animal in English. Pretty relevant to the topic. There you go. And I want to thank you very much for coming out, and hope to see you in 2 weeks maybe, or tomorrow at the Science Cafe in the Forum, or anytime else. Have a good evening.
Die had ik nog niet en die moest ik hebben. Nee. Goed, hè?